Most people don't grow up knowing they played a role in their family. They grow up believing they were simply being themselves, doing the best they could, reacting to the circumstances they were given. It isn't until much later, often decades later, that a different understanding begins to form. Not suddenly, and not dramatically, but slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the mind is testing whether it's finally safe to look back honestly. For many people, this realization doesn't arrive in childhood or even early adulthood. It arrives in the quieter years, after the pace of life slows, after careers peak or end, after children grow up and leave, after the constant pressure to perform, provide, or hold everything together eases just enough for deeper questions to surface. Questions like, why do certain situations still make me tense? Why do I feel responsible for other people's emotions? Why does praise feel uncomfortable, while criticism still echoes years later? Why does rest feel unfamiliar, even undeserved? Psychologist Carl Jung believed that families function less like nurturing environments and more like emotional systems. And systems don't exist to help individuals grow. They exist to maintain balance. When a family carries unresolved pain, suppressed conflict, or unspoken fear, that balance is often preserved not through healing, but through adaptation. And very often, that adaptation falls on children. Without being asked and without realizing it, children begin shaping themselves to meet the emotional needs of the system. Over time, recognizable roles emerge, not because children choose them, and not because they are inherently different, but because the system quietly requires them. One child becomes the scapegoat, another becomes the golden child, another learns to fade into the background. These roles don't end when childhood ends. They extend forward into adulthood, influencing relationships, work, self-worth, and eventually the way people experience aging itself. The scapegoat is often remembered as the difficult one, the child who caused trouble, the one who challenged authority or disrupted the peace. But what's rarely acknowledged is that this child was often the most sensitive to the emotional reality of the household. They noticed tension before it was spoken. They reacted to inconsistencies. They sensed when something wasn't right. Because the family couldn't tolerate that awareness, the discomfort wasn't examined. It was redirected. Blame became a way to stabilize the system. Over time, the scapegoat became the container for frustration, anger, disappointment, and unspoken resentment. The family could remain intact as long as one person carried what no one else would. As adults, many former scapegoats carry a persistent sense of alertness long after the original danger has passed. Their nervous systems learned early that safety was unpredictable. Even later in life, when circumstances are calmer, their bodies remain on guard. They may replay conversations in their mind, worry about how they're perceived, or feel responsible for maintaining emotional harmony in rooms they didn't disturb. And yet, later life often brings a shift. With distance from the family system, the scapegoat begins to see more clearly. The story changes. What once looked like rebellion begins to look like awareness. What once felt like rejection begins to look like separation. Aging, for many scapegoats, brings not bitterness, but discernment. The role loosens. The truth they sensed early finally makes sense. The golden child's experience appears very different, but carries its own weight. This child is praised, protected, and often admired. They are held up as proof that the family is successful, respectable, and functioning. But the love they receive is not unconditional. It is tied to performance, achievement, and meeting expectations, spoken and unspoken. Mistakes are softened, failures are explained away, and expectations quietly rise. Over time, the golden child learns that being valued requires effort, that love must be maintained, that rest, vulnerability, or mediocrity carry risk. As adults, many golden children become high achievers. responsible, capable, reliable. But beneath that competence often lies exhaustion, a feeling that they must keep going, keep proving, keep producing. Later in life, especially when work slows down, health changes, or external validation fades, the structure that once supported their identity weakens. This can be deeply unsettling. Without the role, they may feel unsure who they are. Aging can feel threatening, not because of decline, but because it removes the performance that once guaranteed approval. For some, this becomes an opportunity, a chance to finally ask who they are beyond being impressive. Then there is the child who learned to disappear, not blamed, not praised, simply unnoticed. This child learned early that staying quiet reduced conflict, that needing little felt safer, that self-containment was a form of protection. As adults, they often appear independent and undemanding. But later in life, when external obligations fall away, invisibility can turn into loneliness. Without having practiced taking up space, they may struggle to ask for support, to voice needs, or to believe their presence alone is enough. What all of these roles share is this: none of them were chosen. They were adaptive responses to an environment that required them. And this is the realization many people come to later in life, sometimes with relief, sometimes with grief. You were never broken. You were adapting. Your nervous system learned what was necessary. Your personality formed around survival, not preference. Understanding this isn't about blaming parents or reliving the past. It's about clarity. When you recognize the role you carried, something begins to soften. You stop proving what no longer needs proving. You stop shrinking where it's no longer required. You stop carrying responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. Jung called this process individuation, the gradual return to oneself after a lifetime of adaptation. Not through confrontation, not through resentment, but through awareness. Later life offers something rare: distance. Distance from the family system. Distance from old expectations. Distance from the emotional noise that once dictated who you were allowed to be. And in that distance, a quieter, steadier question emerges. Who am I now without the role I once had to play? You don't need to confront anyone. You don't need to rewrite your history. You only need to stop living as if the old rules still apply. The role may have kept you safe once, but you're allowed to set it down now.